The first thing her mother said when she opened the front door was, "You're Ethan, aren't you?" She looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. Then her hand started shaking against the doorframe. For one strange second, I wondered if I'd driven to the wrong house. Before I could even introduce myself, tears filled her eyes. "Oh, dear God," she whispered. "Rachel told us you died." Those words hit me harder than anything I'd ever heard. Not because they made sense, because they didn't. 3 days earlier, I had been sitting in my office in Columbus, Ohio, looking over invoices for my HVAC company when I caught myself staring at our wedding invitation. September 20th, less than 3 months away. I'd been engaged to Rachel Morgan for almost 6 months and together for nearly 2 years. At 49, I wasn't looking for excitement anymore. I'd already survived one marriage that ended with lawyers, empty savings accounts, and a quiet house that echoed every night. Rachel had changed that. She laughed easily. She loved old diners instead of expensive restaurants. She'd bring me coffee before I even asked. For the first time in years, I actually looked forward to coming home. There was only one thing that never quite fit: her parents. The first time I mentioned meeting them, she smiled and squeezed my hand. "They're really busy." Fair enough. A few weeks later, I asked again. "Dad hasn't been feeling great." I let it go. Another month passed. "My mom hates traveling." Then came the excuse that finally stuck. "They're just not coming to the wedding." She said it so calmly that I almost believed it. Almost. One Sunday afternoon, my older sister Linda came over for her usual visit. We grilled burgers in the backyard while the Reds game played softly on the radio. Linda had always been able to spot trouble before I could. She looked at me over her paper plate. "So, when do I finally get to meet Rachel's folks?" I shrugged. "They're busy." She raised one eyebrow. "For 2 years." I laughed, trying to brush it off. "Families are complicated." She took a sip of iced tea. "They sure are. But I've lived 60 years, Ethan, and I've never heard of parents skipping their daughter's wedding because they're busy." I didn't answer, because I'd been thinking the exact same thing. That night, I asked Rachel again while we were cleaning up after dinner. She stopped rinsing a plate. "I thought we were done talking about this." "I'm just curious. They've got their own lives. I'd still like to meet them." She dried her hands without looking at me. "You don't need to." There wasn't any anger in her voice. That almost made it worse. She kissed my cheek before heading upstairs, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen with the dishwasher humming beside me. I slept maybe 4 hours that night. By Monday afternoon, I had convinced myself I was being paranoid. By Tuesday, I wasn't so sure. Wednesday morning during a coffee break, I spent $25 on one of those public records websites people use to find old classmates. I wasn't trying to invade anyone's privacy. I simply wanted to know if Rachel's parents were okay. 10 minutes later, I was staring at my computer screen. Robert and Susan Morgan, both alive. Same address, Athens, Ohio. 2 hours and 15 minutes from my office. I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my forehead. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Maybe Rachel wanted to protect them. Maybe she was protecting herself. Or maybe, for the first time since I bought the engagement ring, I wondered if I really knew the woman I was about to marry. I didn't tell anyone about the address. Not Linda, not my best friend Gary, and definitely not Rachel. The whole thing felt ridiculous, like something a suspicious husband would do in a TV drama. Except I wasn't her husband. Not yet. I kept telling myself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe they'd had a falling out. Maybe Rachel was embarrassed by where they lived. Maybe she wanted to reconnect after the wedding. Every explanation sounded reasonable for about 30 seconds before another question popped into my head. By Friday afternoon, I had made up my mind. If I was about to promise the rest of my life to someone, I needed to stop guessing. Saturday morning, I left Columbus just after 8. Rachel thought I was driving to Dayton to look at a used commercial van for my business. It wasn't even a complete lie. I had been looking for another van, just not that day. The July air was already warm when I merged onto US Route 33 heading southeast. I stopped at a speedway outside Lancaster for coffee and one of those breakfast sandwiches that always look better than they taste. Standing beside my truck, I looked at my reflection in the window. "You've lost your mind," I muttered. An older man pumping gas nearby laughed. Talking to yourself? Trying to. He smiled. My wife says that's the only way I can get an intelligent conversation. We both laughed. It broke the tension for a minute. Back on the road, I started rehearsing what I'd say. Hi, Mr. and Mrs. Morgan. I'm Ethan. Rachel and I are getting married in September. Simple. Respectful. Maybe they'd be surprised. Maybe we'd all laugh about the misunderstanding. By 10:30, I rolled into Athens. It was exactly the kind of town I expected, a college town with brick buildings, coffee shops, and people walking around with Ohio University shirts. The address wasn't downtown. It sat on a quiet residential street lined with maple trees and modest ranch-style homes built sometime in the 70s. Nothing fancy, nothing neglected, just ordinary. I parked across the street and sat there with the engine off. My heart was pounding harder than it had the day I proposed. I almost drove away. More than once. What if Rachel found out? What if this really was none of my business? Then another thought settled in. If someone asked me not to meet my family before marriage, I'd understand. If they refused to explain why for 2 years, that was different. I crossed the street. The lawn had been freshly cut. There were hanging flower baskets on the porch. A faded American flag moved gently in the breeze. I noticed a small wooden bench beside the front door with 2 empty coffee mugs sitting on it. It looked like the home of people who enjoyed quiet mornings together. I knocked once. Nothing. I waited. Knocked again. Footsteps. Slow ones. The door opened just a few inches. A woman in her late 70s looked out carefully. Her silver hair was pulled back and she wore gardening gloves. Can I help you? Good morning, ma'am. My mouth suddenly felt dry. My name is Ethan Carter. She looked confused. I'm engaged to Rachel. Everything changed. The color drained from her face. Her eyes widened as though she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. She grabbed the edge of the door to steady herself. Behind her, an older man called from another room. Susan, who is it? She never answered him. She just stared at me. Then, barely above a whisper, she said the words that would change everything. You're Ethan, aren't you? Yes. A tear rolled down her cheek. Oh, dear God. She covered her mouth. Rachel told us you died last year. My stomach dropped. Before I could ask what she meant, the older man hurried into the hallway. He looked from his wife to me. Then he quietly said something that made the silence even heavier. I knew someday the truth would find its way here. Robert Morgan didn't say another word for several seconds. He simply held the front door open. You'd better come inside. I stepped into a spotless living room that looked like it hadn't changed much since the late 80s. Family photos covered one wall. A grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner. Everything about the house felt warm, lived in, and painfully ordinary. Susan disappeared into the kitchen. I'll make coffee, she said, though her voice was still trembling. I wanted to tell them there had been some kind of mistake, that Rachel and I were getting married in less than 3 months, that I had no idea why anyone would say I was dead. Instead, I just stood there. Robert motioned toward the couch. Sit down, son. He looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally, like someone who'd spent years carrying questions that had never been answered. Susan returned with 3 mugs, though none of us touched the coffee. She sat beside her husband and looked directly at me. When did you meet Rachel? About 2 years ago. Robert slowly nodded. That makes sense. That's about when we stopped hearing anything through mutual friends. I frowned. I don't understand. Susan reached for a tissue. We haven't spoken to our daughter in 6 years. I honestly thought I'd misheard her. 6 years. She nodded. Not a birthday, not Thanksgiving, not Christmas, nothing. I looked from one parent to the other. But she talks about you. Susan blinked. She does. She says you're busy, that your health isn't great, that traveling is difficult. Robert let out a quiet sigh. My knees aren't what they used to be. He smiled sadly. But I drove to Tennessee last fall to see my brother. Susan shook her head. We would have driven across the country for Rachel. The room became painfully quiet. I looked at the family photographs covering the wall. There was Rachel at maybe 12 years old holding a softball trophy. Another picture showed her wearing a cap and gown. One photo caught my attention. Rachel stood between her parents on what looked like a beach vacation. Everyone was laughing. It didn't look like the family she'd quietly described over the past 2 years. Finally, I asked the question sitting in my chest. Did something happen? Robert answered first. No. No argument. No. No abuse. His face changed instantly. He leaned forward. Did Rachel tell you we abused her? I hesitated. She never used that word. But she always avoided talking about home. Susan disappeared into another room and returned carrying a worn cardboard box. She placed it gently on the coffee table. Inside were dozens of unopened envelopes, birthday cards, Christmas cards, anniversary cards. Every one of them had Rachel's name neatly written across the front. Most had yellow postal stickers. Return to sender undeliverable. Susan picked one up carefully. I still mailed one every birthday. Her hands shook as she held it. I figured maybe one year she'd read it. I didn't know what to say. Robert opened another box. This one contained wrapped Christmas presents, still covered in faded holiday paper. We stopped buying expensive things after the second year. He gave a tired smile. But Susan insisted on wrapping something anyway. Susan quietly added, "You never stop being somebody's mother." I looked down at the floor. My throat felt tight. None of this fit the woman I thought I knew. Then Susan asked the question that caught me completely off guard. Does she seem happy? It took me several seconds to answer. I thought she was. Susan smiled through fresh tears. Then maybe that's enough. Robert looked at his wife before turning back toward me. No. His voice was gentle but firm. It isn't enough. He stood and walked to a bookshelf. From the top shelf, he removed a thick photo album. He opened it on the coffee table. Page after page showed birthdays, camping trips, school plays, college graduation. Every picture told the same story, a family that looked imperfect but close. Then Robert stopped on one particular photo. Rachel was smiling beside a young man I'd never seen before. His arm rested around her shoulders. They were engaged, Robert said quietly. I stared at him. I'm sorry. Robert met my eyes. His name was Michael. Susan closed her eyes. He was supposed to become our son-in-law. I felt my heartbeat quicken again. Robert turned another page. There was someone before him too. I looked up. What do you mean? He answered with heartbreaking calm. You're not the first man Rachel promised to marry. I stared at Robert, waiting for him to smile and tell me I'd misunderstood. He didn't. Susan folded her hands together in her lap. I wish that weren't true. The room suddenly felt smaller. I looked back at the photo album. Rachel couldn't have been much older than 30 in the picture. The young man beside her looked happy, comfortable, like someone who believed his future was already planned. What happened? I asked. Robert slowly closed the album. The same thing that happened to you. I frowned. I don't follow. He never got to know us either. That sent a chill down my spine. Susan took a sip of the coffee she'd forgotten about nearly 20 minutes earlier. It had gone cold. His name was Michael Dawson. Nice young man. Accountant. Lived over in Chillicothe. She gave a faint smile. He called me Mrs. Morgan even after I told him to call me Susan. Robert almost laughed. He was too polite. So, why didn't they get married? The two of them exchanged a glance that told me this wasn't an easy story to tell. We don't really know, Robert admitted. Rachel just disappeared. Gone. Susan nodded. She changed her phone number, closed her social media accounts. We couldn't reach her. Robert leaned back in his chair. A few months later, we heard through an old neighbor that the engagement had ended. No explanation. None. And the man before him, Susan answered quietly. His name was David. I rubbed both hands across my face. So there were 2 engagements. Robert nodded once. As far as we know. I let that sink in. Rachel had told me she'd almost married once when she was younger. She described it as a youthful mistake and said they'd simply wanted different things. She'd never mentioned a second fiancé or that she'd cut off her family before either wedding. I wasn't sure which lie bothered me more. Susan suddenly looked embarrassed. I hope we're not making you think Rachel's a terrible person. I looked at her in surprise. After everything that's happened, you're worried about what I think of her. She's still our daughter. That answer stayed with me. No bitterness, no insults, just sadness. It wasn't what I'd expected. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Rachel. I let it ring. A text appeared almost immediately. How's Dayton find the van? I stared at the screen. For the first time since we'd met, I considered lying to her. Instead, I slipped the phone back into my pocket without answering. Robert noticed. She doesn't know you're here. No. He nodded thoughtfully. That may be for the best. Just then, the front door opened. A young woman carrying a grocery bag stepped inside. Grandma, I brought... She stopped the moment she saw me. Oh, sorry, Susan stood. Emily, this is Ethan. Emily looked from me to her grandparents. The Ethan nobody answered. She set the groceries on the kitchen counter before walking back into the living room. I didn't think you were real. I forced a weak smile. I'm beginning to wonder the same thing. She gave a short, nervous laugh. Then, without realizing what she was about to do, she asked the question that turned my entire afternoon upside down. So, she looked directly at me. Are you going to end up like Michael? The room fell silent. Susan immediately shook her head. Emily, what he deserves to know. I looked at her. What do you mean? She hesitated. I probably shouldn't. Robert sighed. It's all right. Emily took a slow breath. Michael came here once. When? About a month before the wedding. Just like you. Every hair on my arm stood up. He wanted to meet the family Rachel said didn't exist anymore. What happened? Emily looked toward the window. He found out she'd been lying. And then, he called off the wedding. I swallowed hard. Did anyone ever hear from him again? Emily nodded. Oh yeah. He lives about 40 minutes from here. She reached for her phone. I actually know where he works. I didn't expect Michael Dawson to agree to meet me. If I were in his shoes, I probably would have ignored the call. Instead, after Emily gave me his number, I stepped out onto the Morgan's front porch and dialed. He answered on the fourth ring. This is Michael. My name is Ethan Carter. A pause. I'm engaged to Rachel Morgan. Another pause. Longer this time. Finally, he sighed. So, she finally found somebody else. You know who I am? No. But I know why you're calling. I leaned against the porch railing. You do? I had the exact same conversation with her parents 6 years ago. I closed my eyes. Would you be willing to talk? He didn't answer immediately. Then he said something that caught me off guard. There's a Cracker Barrel off Route 50. I can be there in an hour. Robert offered to let me stay for lunch, but I politely declined. My head was spinning. Susan packed me 2 oatmeal cookies anyway. You'll probably forget to eat, she said. She wasn't wrong. Before I left, she gently touched my arm. Whatever happens, don't let this make you hate her. I nodded, though I honestly didn't know how I felt anymore. Confused, sad, angry, mostly confused. Michael was already waiting when I pulled into the Cracker Barrel parking lot. He stood beside a silver Ford F-15, wearing jeans and a faded Ohio State polo shirt. He looked to be around my age. When I walked over, he smiled politely and held out his hand. You must be Ethan. I appreciate you meeting me. No problem. Inside, we grabbed a booth near the window. Neither of us ordered food, just coffee. The waitress topped off our mugs before walking away. Michael stirred his coffee even though he hadn't added anything to it. So, he looked at me. How much has she told you? Not much, apparently. He nodded. That's usually how it starts. I frowned. What do you mean? When Rachel and I started dating, everything was great. I almost laughed. That's exactly how I'd describe us. I know, he smiled sadly. She's funny, easy to talk to, makes you feel like you're the only guy in the room. Every word sounded familiar. We dated almost 3 years, he continued. I proposed during a weekend trip to Gatlinburg. I remembered Rachel telling me she'd never been to Tennessee. Another lie. We picked a wedding date, Michael said. Started looking at venues. So what happened? He looked out the window for several seconds. One lie. Just one, and it never stays at one. He leaned forward. First, it was little things. Like, she'd tell co-workers she'd already paid bills she hadn't paid. Tell friends she'd visited relatives she never actually saw. Nothing huge. Just unnecessary. I listened quietly. Then the wedding got closer. His expression changed. The lies got bigger. Her father was having heart surgery. Her aunt had cancer. Her cousin had been arrested. Were any of those true? No. Not one. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Michael continued. Whenever I asked questions, she'd get upset. She'd accuse me of not trusting her. I stared into my coffee. Rachel had said almost the exact same thing to me every time I asked about her parents. Michael wasn't finished. The last straw came 3 weeks before our wedding. He reached into a worn leather folder he'd brought with him. I still keep these. He slid several papers across the table. At first glance, they looked like hospital documents. Admission forms, lab reports, doctor's notes. They're fake. I looked up. What? I verified them. Rachel claimed she'd spent 2 nights at Riverside Methodist Hospital with her mother. He tapped one page. The hospital confirmed nobody by that name had been admitted. I slowly set the papers down. I couldn't believe she'd fake something like that. I couldn't either. Michael gave a tired smile. So I drove to Athens, just like I had. I met Robert and Susan, and they were just as shocked as yours were today. He folded his hands. I ended the engagement the next morning. I took a slow breath. Did she ever explain? Michael shook his head. No. She just cried. And then she told everyone I abandoned her because she'd chosen her family over me. I looked at him carefully. Did people believe her? He chuckled without humor. About half. The waitress returned to refill our coffee. Neither of us noticed until she quietly asked, Everything okay, gentlemen? Michael smiled politely. We're just comparing old mistakes. After she walked away, he looked at me with genuine concern. Ethan, this isn't about proving her parents were good people. It's about figuring out how many other parts of your life aren't what they seem. Those words stayed with me all the way back to Columbus, because deep down, I was starting to wonder the very same thing. The drive back to Columbus felt twice as long as the trip down. I turned the radio off somewhere outside Logan and drove the rest of the way in silence. Every few miles, my phone buzzed. Rachel, did you buy the van a few minutes later? Everything okay? Then you're acting weird today. I didn't answer any of them, not because I wanted to punish her, because I didn't trust myself to say the right thing. When I pulled into my driveway, Rachel's car was already there. She opened the front door before I even reached the porch. There you are. She smiled and wrapped her arms around me. For a second, I almost forgot everything. She smelled like vanilla lotion and the spaghetti sauce she'd been cooking. Long day, she asked. Yeah? How'd the van look? Not worth buying. The lie came out easier than I expected. She nodded. Good. I was hoping you'd wait a little longer anyway. She kissed my cheek and went back into the kitchen. I stood there watching her stir a pot on the stove. Everything looked normal. That's what made it so unsettling. Over dinner, Rachel talked about flowers for the wedding. She wanted sunflowers on every table. I nodded at the right moments. She laughed about something her coworker had said. I laughed too. Inside, though, I kept replaying my conversation with Michael. It's about figuring out how many other parts of your life aren't what they seem. That sentence wouldn't leave me alone. The next morning, I called my bank. Not because I suspected Rachel of stealing. I simply wanted to review a few accounts before the wedding. The representative was cheerful. Anything in particular you're looking for, Mr. Carter? No, just recent activity. She emailed me the statements. I printed them at the office. At first glance, nothing looked unusual. Mortgage, utilities, gas, business expenses. Then I noticed a charge for $47.89 at a pharmacy I'd never visited. A few days later, another. Then $63 at a grocery store on the other side of town. Nothing large, nothing alarming, just unfamiliar. I checked the dates. Most happened while I was out servicing customers. I called the credit card company. Can you tell me whether these were physical card purchases or digital wallet transactions? The representative placed me on hold. When she returned, she said, "Those were made using an authorized card under your account." "I only have one card." "Actually, sir," more typing, "there are two." My stomach tightened. There shouldn't be. Our records show a secondary card was issued about 11 months ago. I gripped the edge of my desk. "Who requested it?" "I'm sorry, sir. For security reasons, I can't discuss that over the phone." I drove straight to the bank. The branch manager pulled up my account. There it is. He turned the monitor toward me. An authorized user, Rachel Morgan. I stared at the screen. "I don't remember approving this." He frowned. "The paperwork appears complete." He printed a copy. The signature looked like mine. Almost. Close enough that I might have missed it if I hadn't been staring. But something about it bothered me. The way I crossed my T, the way I wrote the C in Carter. Tiny details, wrong details. The manager noticed my expression. "Is there a problem?" I stopped. "I honestly don't know." That evening, after Rachel went upstairs to shower, I opened the small fireproof box where I kept important documents. Insurance policies, the mortgage, my will. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Then I found a folder labeled life insurance. I remembered updating the policy after we got engaged. Mostly routine paperwork. I flipped to the beneficiary page. Rachel's name. That wasn't surprising. What surprised me was the date. The form had been submitted almost 4 months before I remembered signing it. I looked closer. The signature matched the one from the bank. Close, but not mine. I sat there for several minutes, unable to move. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe the insurance company had copied an old signature electronically. Maybe I was letting fear cloud my judgment. I wanted one of those explanations to be true. I really did. Because the alternative meant the woman I loved hadn't just lied about her family. It meant she'd been quietly building a life around paperwork I never knowingly approved. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized I was no longer trying to save my wedding. I was trying to figure out whether I was living with a stranger. For the next 3 days, I barely slept. Every time Rachel smiled at me, I caught myself wondering whether it was genuine or rehearsed. That thought made me feel guilty. I didn't want to become the kind of man who questioned every word his partner said. But I couldn't ignore what I'd already learned. The fake signature, the second credit card, her parents, Michael. None of it fit together by accident. Monday afternoon, I drove to my insurance agent's office. His name was Bill Henderson. We'd known each other for almost 15 years. He greeted me with the same joke he always used. "You here to make me richer?" "Actually," I said, forcing a smile, "I'm hoping you can save me some money." He laughed and invited me into his office. After a few minutes of small talk, I asked if we could review my policy. "No problem." He pulled everything up on his computer. "I mainly wanted to confirm when I changed the beneficiary." Bill frowned. "You don't remember?" "Not exactly." He clicked through several screens. "Looks like we received the paperwork in February." "I thought it was June." "Nope." He turned the monitor toward me. "February 19th. That was nearly 4 months before I remembered discussing it. "Can I see the original?" He printed the scanned document. The signature was the same one I'd already seen. Close enough. Wrong enough. Bill noticed me studying it. "Everything okay?" "I honestly don't think I signed this." His smile disappeared. "You serious?" "I think so." He leaned back. "Ethan, if that's true, we need to investigate." I nodded. "But not yet." He looked surprised. "You don't want us to report it?" "Not until I understand what's going on." Bill hesitated before quietly saying, "Be careful." "I will." "I mean it." "So do I." That evening, I decided to test something. Nothing dramatic, just a simple question. Rachel was reading on the couch while I watched the local news. I muted the television. "Hey," she looked up. "Yeah. I was thinking maybe we should postpone the wedding a few months." Her face changed instantly. "What? Just until things slow down." "Why would we do that?" "I've been busy with work." "We're both busy." "I know. So why wait?" There wasn't any panic in her voice. Not yet. Just irritation. I shrugged. "I figured it might give us more time." She closed her book. "Ethan, You've wanted this wedding as much as I have. I still do. Then what changed? I looked at her. I don't know. For the first time in our relationship, she didn't reach for my hand. Instead, she stood. I think you're hiding something. I could say the same. The words slipped out before I could stop them. She stared at me. What does that mean? Nothing. No. She folded her arms. What does that mean? I shook my head. Forget it. She didn't. For the rest of the evening, she barely spoke. The next morning, I left early for work. Around lunchtime, my office manager called. Ethan, yeah. Did Rachel stop by? My heart skipped. What do you mean? She said she was dropping off your lunch. I wasn't here. Well, she hesitated. I thought it was a little strange. Why? I saw her come out of your office about 15 minutes later. I froze. Was she carrying anything? I don't think so. Did she go through your desk? I couldn't tell. I thanked her and hung up. I drove back immediately. Nothing looked out of place. My desk was neat. The filing cabinets were closed. Then I noticed something small. The receipt from the Speedway gas station in Lancaster. The one from my trip to Athens. It wasn't where I'd left it. I searched every drawer. Nothing. It was gone. That night, Rachel was unusually cheerful. She ordered pizza from my favorite place. She even suggested we watch an old Clint Eastwood movie together. Halfway through the film, she rested her head on my shoulder. You know, she said softly, I'm really lucky to have you. I smiled. So am I. It sounded convincing. I almost believed myself. Then just before bed, she asked a question that made everything click. By the way, she looked completely casual. How was Athens? Every muscle in my body locked. I hadn't said a word, not to anyone. She smiled, not warmly, knowingly. And in that moment, I realized the game had changed. I kept my face as still as I could. Athens. Rachel held my eyes for another second before smiling. Oh, she gave a little shrug. I meant Dayton. Then she stood up and carried her empty bowl into the kitchen. I stayed on the couch listening to the faucet run. She knew. Whether she'd slipped or was testing me, I couldn't tell. But I knew one thing for certain. She had searched my office. She had found something. And from that moment on, every conversation between us felt like a chess match. The next morning, I called Linda. I need your advice. She didn't ask questions over the phone. Come over after dinner. Linda lived only 15 minutes away in Westerville. We'd always been close even after my divorce. When I walked into her kitchen, she took one look at my face. How bad is it? Worse than you guessed. I spent nearly an hour telling her everything. The trip to Athens, meeting Robert and Susan, Michael, the forged paperwork, the extra credit card, Rachel asking about Athens. Linda listened without interrupting. When I finally finished, she slowly pushed a cup of coffee toward me. I hate saying this. What? You don't have a wedding problem. You have a fraud problem. I rubbed my forehead. I still don't understand why. You may never. That doesn't help. I know. She leaned forward. But you don't need to understand why someone lies before you decide not to trust them. That sentence stayed with me. The wedding was less than 7 weeks away. Deposits had been paid. Invitations mailed. Nearly 100 guests had already RSVP'd. Part of me wanted to call everything off immediately. Another part wanted answers. Real answers. I called Michael. I think she knows I went to Athens. He wasn't surprised. Then she'll probably make the first move. What do you mean? If she's anything like she was with me, she'll try to get ahead of the story. How? By making you look like the problem. He was right. It started 48 hours later. Gary, my best man, stopped by the office. He closed the door behind him. Can I ask you something? Sure. Rachel told Melissa you've been acting strange. I looked up. What kind of strange? She said you've become obsessed with her family. I didn't answer. Gary shifted uncomfortably. She said you hired someone to investigate her. I looked up a public address. Ethan, I didn't stalk anybody. I'm just telling you what people are hearing. I nodded. I appreciate that. He hesitated before leaving. You okay? I honestly don't know. By Friday, the rumors had spread farther than I expected. One couple quietly withdrew from the wedding. Another texted Rachel to ask if she was safe. Safe. The word stung. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't threatened her, hadn't even confronted her. Yet somehow I was becoming the villain. Friday evening, Rachel found me sitting on the back porch. She carried 2 glasses of iced tea. Mind if I join you? Of course. She handed me a glass and sat beside me. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, she sighed. I hate secrets. So do I. She nodded thoughtfully. I know you don't trust me anymore. I looked at her. I want to. Then stop digging. I'm not digging. Yes, you are. She smiled sadly. Some families are just complicated. I almost believed she was about to tell me the truth. Instead, she stood. If you love me, she paused, you'll let the past stay buried. Then she walked back inside. That night, I made my decision. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted to embarrass Rachel, because I couldn't marry someone whose entire life depended on keeping me in the dark. But simply canceling the wedding wouldn't solve anything. Half our friends already believed I was unstable. If I walked away now, Rachel's version would become the only version. The truth would disappear. I called Robert. I'm sorry to ask this. You don't have to apologize. I think it's time everyone met. He was quiet for a moment. Then he softly asked, Are you sure? I looked at the wedding invitation lying on my kitchen counter. No, I've never been less sure of anything. But I think it's the only honest thing left to do. Robert took a slow breath. We'll be there. The morning of the wedding didn't feel like the happiest day of my life. It felt like I was driving toward the end of one. I woke up before 5 even though I hadn't slept much. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I made a pot of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared out the window as the sun came up over the maple tree in my front yard. I'd imagined this day 100 different ways. None of them looked like this. Around 8, Gary knocked on the front door. He walked in carrying 2 garment bags. You ready? I forced a smile. As ready as I'll ever be. He studied my face. I've known you for 30 years. I know. You're about to do something difficult. I nodded. I don't know if it's the right thing. He put a hand on my shoulder. Then make sure it's the honest thing. The ceremony was being held at a restored barn just outside Dublin, Ohio. Nothing extravagant. White chairs, fresh flowers, a small pond behind the property. Rachel had fallen in love with the place the first time we toured it. By 2 o'clock, guests had started arriving. I recognized neighbors, former co-workers, my cousins from Cincinnati. Linda hugged me longer than usual. You okay? No. Good. I looked at her. If you said yes, I'd think you weren't taking this seriously. She squeezed my hand and walked toward her seat. Rachel looked beautiful. There was no point pretending otherwise. When I saw her through the dressing room doorway, my heart broke a little. Her dress was elegant without being flashy. Her hair was pinned up just the way she'd always wanted. For one dangerous moment, I wondered if I should forget everything. Maybe people make mistakes. Maybe everyone deserves another chance. Then I remembered Susan's unopened birthday cards, Robert's quiet disappointment, the forged signature, the extra credit card. This wasn't one mistake, it was a pattern. 5 minutes before the ceremony, my phone vibrated. A text from Robert. We're here. Waiting where you asked. I typed back. Thank you. Please stay inside until I come get you. Another message appeared. From Michael. I'm here too. I slipped the phone into my pocket. The music started. Guests stood. Rachel began walking down the aisle with a family friend she'd asked to escort her. She smiled at me. I smiled back. Not because I was happy, because I wanted her to reach the front before the truth did. The officiant welcomed everyone. We reached the opening remarks. Then he looked at me. Ethan, are you ready to begin? I took a slow breath. No. The room became perfectly still. Rachel turned toward me. What? I looked at the officiant. I'm sorry. Then I faced the guests. Before anyone says vows today, there are some people who deserve to be here. Rachel's expression changed instantly. Ethan. I walked calmly toward the back of the room. She reached for my arm. What are you doing? I gently stepped away. I'm done keeping secrets. I opened the side door. Robert and Susan were waiting quietly in the hallway. Susan looked terrified. Robert simply nodded once. You don't have to do this, he whispered. I know. But I do. Together we walked into the ceremony, the room filled with whispers. Several guests looked confused. Others turned toward Rachel. She hadn't moved. Her face had gone completely pale. Susan stopped halfway down the aisle. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She wasn't angry. She wasn't dramatic. She simply looked at her daughter with the expression only a mother could have after losing 6 years she could never get back. Rachel took one small step backward. No, she barely whispered it. No. Then she looked directly at me. What have you done? I answered quietly enough that only the first few rows could hear. I invited your parents to their daughter's wedding. And for the first time since I'd met her, Rachel had absolutely nothing to say. Nobody spoke. Not for several long seconds. The only sound in the room was the soft buzz of the air conditioner and the faint creak of someone shifting in a folding chair. Rachel stared at her parents as if they weren't real. Susan took one hesitant step forward. Hi, sweetheart. Her voice cracked. I've missed you. Rachel's eyes filled with panic. No. She shook her head. No, you can't be here. Robert answered calmly. We didn't come to embarrass you. We came because Ethan asked us to. A murmur spread through the guests. I recognized the expressions. Confusion, disbelief, people trying to piece together a story they hadn't known existed. The officiant quietly stepped aside. No one had asked him to. He simply understood this ceremony wasn't moving forward. Rachel turned toward me. You went behind my back. Yes. You had no right. I was about to marry you. That doesn't give you permission to invade my life. I nodded. You're right. It doesn't. It does give me the right to know who I'm marrying. She opened her mouth, closed it again. Then she pointed toward her parents. You don't know them. Before I could answer, Susan gently spoke. He knows us better than you think. Rachel looked like she'd been slapped. Michael quietly entered through the side door. He hadn't been standing in the room. He'd waited outside until I texted him. A few guests turned to look. Rachel's face lost what little color it had left. No, she whispered again. Michael stopped several feet away. He wasn't angry. If anything, he looked tired. I didn't come here to hurt you. Rachel laughed bitterly. Really, no. I came because Ethan deserved to know he wasn't crazy. Several guests looked back and forth between us. Gary slowly walked over beside me. So, he whispered, this is the guy. I nodded once. Rachel suddenly straightened her shoulders. Fine. You all want the truth. She looked around the room. My parents judged every decision I ever made. Robert quietly shook his head. No. They controlled me. Susan's eyes filled with tears. No, sweetheart. They lied, Rachel shouted. They always lied. For the first time all afternoon, Robert raised his voice. No. It wasn't loud, but it stopped everyone. You don't have to love us. You don't even have to forgive us for whatever you think we did. He paused. But don't make strangers carry burdens that belong to you. The room fell silent again. Linda walked over to stand beside me. She looked directly at Rachel. You told everyone Ethan had become obsessed with your family. Rachel didn't answer. You told Melissa he hired private investigators. Still nothing. You told people he frightened you. Rachel looked away. Linda's voice stayed calm. My brother spent 2 years asking to meet your parents. She gestured toward Robert and Susan. These people would have driven here with flowers if you'd simply invited them. Several guests quietly nodded. I noticed Melissa wiping away tears. Gary looked at me. I'm sorry. So am I. Rachel looked around the room as though searching for someone to rescue her. Nobody moved. Finally, she looked at me. You planned this. I planned to tell the truth. You wanted revenge. I thought about that for a moment. Then I answered honestly. No. I wanted a marriage built on honesty. I don't think that's possible anymore. She stared at me for a long time. Then she quietly removed the engagement ring. She placed it in my hand. Neither of us cried. There wasn't anything left to cry about. Without another word, she walked past every guest through the barn doors and into the parking lot. Nobody followed her. The venue manager asked if we'd like everyone to leave. I shook my head. No. I stood in front of the people we'd invited to celebrate our future. I'm sorry. I truly believed today would end differently. An older cousin smiled kindly. Son, he looked around the room. You saved yourself before it was too late. A few people quietly applauded, not because anyone had won, because the truth had finally caught up. The honeymoon refunds covered most of the deposits we'd lost. A few months later, I used the remaining money to help Robert and Susan replace their leaking roof. They argued with me about accepting it. I told them they could repay me by inviting me over for coffee once in a while. Susan laughed. You drive 2 hours for coffee. Your oatmeal cookies are worth the trip. That became our running joke. As for Rachel, I never saw her again. I heard she moved to another state. I hope she found the help she needed. Carrying that many lies has to be exhausting. As for me, I learned that trust isn't built on promises or beautiful words. It's built on the small, ordinary truths people choose to tell every day, even when they're uncomfortable. If this story reminded you that honesty matters more than appearances, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoy stories about resilience, family, and finding the truth, I'd be grateful if you join me again next time.